Hi everyone, Gene here. Welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast, where every single week we answer the most common and uncommon questions about tapping and EFT so you get the most out of your practice, eliminate self-sabotage, and take the action that you want. I have created a new service to help you do exactly that. 3 times a week, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to send a text message to you, if you are so inclined, reminding you to tap. I hear all the time from my clients, I wish I remembered to tap. And so this is going to be a gentle way to do that. Now, it's important to recognize I'm not creating new content for this. If you sign up for this service, what it's going to do is it's going to point you to old resources I've created. There's over 850 of them at the website. I'm going to point you to tap along audios and videos of people that I like, that I didn't create, that I have their permission to share with you. And so it's an opportunity for you to receive a reminder. Because I'm not creating any new content, I'm basically going to do this at a financial loss. If I'm lucky, I will break even. So for this service, it's only going to cost $20 for an entire calendar year. And that's not $20 a month. That's $20 a month for this little experiment. If you'd like more information about it, all you need to do is go to tappingqa.com/SMS. That's 3 letters SMS, Sam, Michael, Sam, because text messages are called SMS messages, and you'll get all of the details. The most common question I've been getting, does it work outside of the United States? And yes, it will work anywhere in the world. Only $20. Check it out for the details.
Is this concept that the divorce isn't what broke the marriage, the abuse is what broke the marriage. The divorce is just a consequence of that. And so she's not the one breaking this marriage. It was already broken.
This is Gene Montrose telling welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast, recorded live to tape from Williamsburg in Brooklyn. This is episode 371, originally aired July 10th, 2019. Hi everyone, I hope this finds you well wherever you are and whatever time of day you're getting a chance to listen to this. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Today we're going to have a conversation about tapping for being caught in a toxic or an abusive relationship. Last week we had a conversation about divorce and how we can use tapping when considering that or healthily going through it. If you want to listen to that, all you need to do is go to tappingpodcast.com. Click on the link for episode 370. That's tappingpodcast.com, episode 370. Or if you look in the show notes, I have a link to that in the show notes here. This conversation is different than that conversation. Divorce is about getting out of a relationship that is no longer one that is working for you. Getting out of a toxic and an abusive relationship is something that's really different. It is more than just navigating a legal process and dealing with the emotions because of all that goes with that. So today I have a conversation with my friend Melissa Beasley. She does a lot of advocacy for women who are in abusive relationships. She's worked with a number of women to help them in that process. Before we jump in, a couple of really important notes. The first is this is a really sensitive subject. And if you are not in a certain situation where right now where you are sitting, and that could be any context, that could be your emotional state, that could be your place in life, in which hearing a conversation about abuse and toxic relationships is not something that is good for you, make a good choice. Don't make sure you're listening to something that is useful for you, or make sure that you're around people you want to be listening to this sort of conversation with. Number 2, during the conversation, Melissa regularly uses the pronoun she when she's talking about someone who is caught in and is a victim of a toxic or an abusive relationship. And after the fact, she wanted me to mention that the reason why she does that is most of the people that she has worked with are women. And so therefore, it is her default to use the pronoun she. She does acknowledge, as do I, that there are times in which men are caught in abusive relationships. So it's not only women experience this, but the predominance of it happening is to women, and the predominance of Melissa's experience is with women, and that's why that happened. The last thing is to recognize the fact that we're going to share a lot of really good information in this conversation, but the information we share in this conversation isn't necessarily going to be enough. It is a great starter for those of you who want to be with and accompany your friends who are in difficult circumstances and to help you to recognize things that they're not able to recognize. The second is, if this is you, this is just going to give you a signpost to recognize that you are not alone, to help you get some clarity about your experience, to give you some advice on tapping, but this is not the end-all be-all resource. If you go into the show notes, so if you're listening to this in a podcast app, you can go into the show notes, or if you go to tappingpodcast.com and click on the link for episode 371, Melissa has provided a great list of resources, organizations that you can reach out to, websites that provide 24 hours a day, 7 days a week chat support, so you can have someone who you can hear, a number of great book recommendations. And so all of those resources are included on the website. So please take the time to listen to this. We're going to spend time talking about the 4 stages that you go through from recognizing that you are in a toxic relationship to being on the other side and rebuilding, why it's hard to identify these things. We're going to talk about the types of things that you can tap for in the moment, the types of things that you can bring to a skilled practitioner, the questions that you need to be asking. So without any further ado, here is my conversation with Melissa Beasley about tapping toxic and abusive relationships. In our preparation, letting people behind the curtain, I always like to get a kind of sense of where we want to go in this conversation. And you did a really good job of just kind of laying out 4 kind of touch points that people who are in abusive, toxic relationships go through. Mm-hmm. Kind of going from recognizing in the moment, getting out, getting help, rebuilding on the other side.
Right.
And I think it just makes the most sense for us to kind of walk through those things sequentially. So the place we start is someone who is in a horribly abusive, toxic relationship. Talk to me a little bit about what that is like for someone who is stuck there and why it is such a difficult thing. Because from the outside, it's really easy to go, boy, you're being treated really badly. Why don't you just leave? So talk to it like for a woman who's going through something like that. What is the experience like when you're stuck inside?
So that's a really good question and kind of broad because it's a long experience. So first there's getting into that relationship. And the thing people don't understand is that he didn't start treating her like trash right away. A lot of times at first, he's a really wonderful boyfriend, really wonderful fiance, kind of makes all the other boyfriends around him look bad. And really showers her until she's just really committed and in love. And the thing about human beings is when we're really committed and love someone, we'll put up with a lot to stay in that. And so oftentimes she gets into this place of trying to recover that original first love, you know, that man that she fell in love with, that she knows is there and is possible. And so she spends this time trying to be a good partner, be a good spouse, be a good wife, be a good girlfriend, to get that old love back. And during the process, she's met with several different tactics to really bring you off balance. Things like crazy making and gaslighting, which are in the news a lot more lately than they were in the past several years. And those are things that make her doubt her reality, make her doubt if she knows what she's talking about, make her doubt if things that she saw happen really happened.
Could you define both of those terms for folks who aren't familiar with them?
Absolutely. Yeah. So crazy making is basically the act of making mountains out of molehills for someone. So a situation, for example, might be, say a woman's child is at the playground and he falls and scrapes his knee or gets hurt. And it was just a kid playing on the playground and he got hurt. She might go home and be told that she was being neglectful and she's not watching him enough and she's a terrible mother because her child had this horrible accident that's going to traumatize him for the rest of his life. Mm-hmm. Now, what really happened is he fell down and he scraped himself.
Right.
But what has been created within her now is this idea that it's this giant deal. And I see mothers do this a lot because then what happens is tiny things become big things. I don't know if I can put my child in daycare because then I'm never going to be around her and she's going to have abandonment wounds. But if I don't put her in daycare, I can't keep a job. And so then we'll be poverty stricken. And it's this world where every choice is a do or die possible worst case scenario choice. And so that's crazy making, is where every tiny thing is a big thing. So you're always on guard looking for major disasters.
And so basically what it sounds like is happening is, because of the information you're getting from your spouse, your partner, because they're blowing things up, it's making you hypervigilant. And when we're hypervigilant, our amygdala is overworking and we're in flight or flight all of the time, which not only complicates the moment of us making a good choice in this moment because we're overreacting, but we're also then dealing with the long-term physical consequences of being in a constantly stressed environment, which then makes the next moment harder because we're more resource depleted, and it compounds upon itself.
Exactly. Yes, that's perfect. So then gaslighting is, it's another thing that actually causes a little bit of crazy, for lack of a better word, inside of the mind of the person that's being gaslighted. And it comes from an old movie, where this woman was very wealthy and her husband wanted her inheritance. He wanted her money. And so what he did was he actually started, it was back when the lights were powered by gas, and he started adjusting their brightness without saying anything. And so she started saying, I think the lights are darker today. And he was just, I don't know what you're talking about. The lights are fine. They're just like they were yesterday. And he would adjust them, and she would keep thinking they were different. But the man she trusted to love her and be her husband, who she should be able to believe, kept saying, no, they're fine. So she lost faith in her own ability to come to understand reality.
Right.
One story where I've seen this play out was a man would hide his wife's keys, and she would go around the house looking for them. And when she just could not find them anywhere, he would put them on the coffee table or on a shelf and say, they've been here this whole time. And it's just these tiny things that make you doubt whether you can believe what you see and whether you can believe what you know. Another thing that'll happen is you'll say, well, you said this to me, or you did this to me, or you behaved in this way. And the person doing the gaslighting will say, that never happened. I didn't say that. And they did. So then you start to not trust yourself. You lose the ability to believe that what you know to be real is actually real.
And so I'm guessing what that then does is, in addition to making you question things in the moment, you then become more dependent upon the person you're in a relationship with, because as you question yourself more, you start giving them more and more authority, because obviously they're the person that understands what is going on, which gives them the ability to be even more control.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So it is a slow process of removing the victim's agency and control over their own lives.
As you say that, then I can see how it becomes even harder for someone to extricate themselves from this sort of circumstance, because they're in a situation where their intuition and their instinct becomes the thing they doubt the most, that they trust the least, which then, from the outside, it might be obvious that this is something that is not going well, but the person on the inside can't trust themselves or even trust the people that they love who aren't in that relationship, because of the way that they're perceiving their circumstance and they're perceiving information.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so then you compound the fact that oftentimes in an abusive situation, the woman has been isolated from anyone that would empower or support her.
Absolutely.
By moving them across the country, by feeding things into them to create discord between them and their family. Or sometimes the abusive person ends up getting the family on his side. And she loses the support of her family. There is the financial aspect. Oftentimes their finances are combined, and she is put in a position where she's no longer able to support herself, and she depends entirely on the person abusing her, so that she doesn't have, if she leaves, she will not have a home. She will be living in a car with her children. She'll be living in a shelter. She won't be able to provide for herself. And then on top of that is the fact that because of the crazy making, because of the gaslighting, because of the financial abuse where she no longer has any money, she's in this position where once she's out, it's going to be very difficult for her to be able to create a new life because she is completely dependent on her abuser. And seeking help is very difficult because there are a lot of cultures and circles in our world and in our country where when a woman comes and asks for help, what she's going to be told is it's a 50-50 thing. You're causing as much of the problem as he is. Right. What are you doing? Are you nagging him? Are you being too hard on him to make him be this way towards you? You just need to be more loving. Mm-hmm. And she's told by him and by culture, this idea of don't air your dirty laundry, don't put things out in public like that, that when she does come forward and say these things are happening, she truly believes she's the one being hysterical. She's the one causing problems. She's the one being uncooperative.
And I can then imagine with all of this sense of being told part of it is your fault, being in a circumstance where you don't feel like you have agency, then if you add children into the mix, I'm guessing that just becomes this multiplying factor. Mm-hmm. Because now not only am I worried about like caring for myself, I have these other creatures that I love desperately that am I putting them in danger? Am I putting them into a place where I'm going to be the one that's going to see the problem in this circumstance? They're going to be taken from me. Or if I do get out, we're going to be living in the car, and how can I do that to my children? I should be able to suck this thing up because it's for the good of the children. Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty much every choice a mom makes once a child's born is for her child. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, and it's funny because for the children is the reason a lot of women stay and the reason a lot of women leave. Some women think, I don't want my child to be from a divorced home, from a broken home. I'm going to stay and I'm going to love this man and I'm going to do my best for the children. And there are a lot of other women that look and say, this is never going to be a healthy place. I don't want a divorce. Especially my background, I come from a religious background where divorce is the last thing a woman wants. Like it's one of the ultimate sins you can commit. And so they look and they say, I can't raise my children in this home in a safe way. If I raise them in this home, it's just going to perpetuate this cycle of abuse. So they take on that possible homelessness, that fear of the unknown, and that rejection from their community for the children. A lot of those decisions are made that way. One thing that I learned and that women learn that is this concept that the divorce isn't what broke the marriage. The abuse is what broke the marriage. The divorce is just a consequence of that. And so she's not the one breaking this marriage. It was already broken. But yeah.
Once someone gets to a point where they have a sense of clarity, a sense of courage, a sense of trusting their own instinct, maybe they're lucky enough to have some infrastructure around them of loved ones who are able to say, no, this needs to end. What is the struggle or the reality or the process of that starting to get out? What does that look like?
Okay, so the starting to get out process is actually possibly one of the hardest pieces of this whole thing. Because while she was in the relationship, she was coping. She was tiptoeing around. She was using the defense and coping mechanisms that she learned in order to survive within a bad situation. So it was bad, but she was at almost like a coasting point. When she decides to leave, not only is she facing the fears of going out into a world where she doesn't believe in herself and doesn't know what's going to happen, but she is now not following the rules. And so the abuse gets much worse. The leaving process is the most dangerous time for a woman and for her children. Because as she stops following the status quo and as she starts standing up for herself and becoming independent and the abuser starts to lose control, he will use more and more drastic means to get her back under control. And it is the time that is the most dangerous for her and for her children and when she needs the most protection and support. So the things that, I talked during this first section about what was done to her in the marriage and what the consequences of that were, that she doesn't have agency. She doesn't trust herself. She has all of these, I call it knots tied in your head. Or another way I used to put it is that it's like you were Alice in Wonderland, but you started to believe that was the real world. And now you have to unlearn this world and relearn the real world, where people don't understand why you're acting the way you're acting because they've never lived in Wonderland. So the ways that shows up are she doesn't find the help she needs because she doesn't think she deserves it or doesn't know where to look. And so the first important thing is finding some really good victims advocates and finding a domestic violence shelter that can really offer counseling. Couples counseling is one of the worst things you can do because oftentimes they're not trained in domestic violence and they don't know how to empower a woman to make her life better. The second place this shows up is in the court system. A woman who has been told for several years that she's not allowed to ask for what she needs, that she's not allowed to take care of herself, and that she's not worthy of love, respect, and finances is not going to ask for child support, is not going to stand up for herself in court against a man that's trying to take her children. And so without support and education, she ends up losing even more in that process. That process is a very touchy one. And fortunately, there are a lot of organizations out there dedicated specifically to helping women through that transition time.
And so one of the things I want to loop back to that you said inside of there that I think is useful for us to hit is this idea about couples counseling, that it's not a critique of couples counseling. It's a critique of the particular type of issue that a woman in this circumstance is dealing with. You know, it's kind of like when I have a really severe cut, I don't go sit in the doctor's office waiting for my general practitioner. I go to the emergency room.
Absolutely.
And so, and both of them are providing medical care, but because of the extreme nature of the injury I'm dealing with, I need to go to something that is specialized in this. And there's lots of active, valid, really awesome ways that couple counseling can help relationships that are about equal partnership and about being saved. And in a circumstance where there is abuse that is going on, that's something different. And you need to be stepping towards the resources and the people who are trained and know how to deal with that specifically.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you said that because it's absolutely true. Couples counseling has a really good place. I know several people who are relationship coaches and couples counselors that are really wonderful. A really well-trained one with a good eye will be able to see when there is abuse and will be able to pull the woman aside and say, this is what you really need to go do. Unfortunately, a lot of women have been in situations where that didn't happen. And I like that you brought up the idea of mutuality and people just needing to learn how to communicate and be mutual and cooperate within couples counseling. That is where a lot of things go wrong when the counselor doesn't see that it's abuse and is just doing their best. Because in the mind of an abusive and manipulative person, cooperation means you do what I want you to do. And oftentimes you have one person who is dedicated to cooperation, dedicated to working together, dedicated to make things work. So they will compromise in order to try to make the relationship work, whereas the other person doesn't see a middle ground as good. So what ends up happening is one person gives an inch and the other person takes that inch and asks for another one. And so that person gives that inch. And what ends up happening is you're knee deep before you know it, and don't know how you got there when it was just you trying to do what is said to be done in healthy relationships of compromise, cooperate, meet in the middle. But you can't do that. And you end up sometimes feeling unreasonable because you have to draw this hard boundary that the other person doesn't appreciate.
Let's pretend, or let's continue the process where the person has gotten on the other side.
Right.
They've gotten themselves out. Now they've just extricated themselves from something that is really bad, which is good, which is great, which is awesome. And I'm guessing that is not enough. So what is this kind of third step in this process that a woman goes on in this journey? Where do they land themselves next?
So now you're in this recovery phase. And this is a time during which women need to be really gentle with themselves. You know, a lot of times what happens is they've gotten out, they've gotten free. You know, maybe they've got a small apartment with their kids and they're in this place where they're free and safe for the first time. Now is a time to heal. Now is the time to get a good therapist, to join a support group, to find resources that are going to build you up, because you've gotten through the crisis. You've gotten through the first emergency period, but you now have beliefs to unlearn, thoughts to unlearn, and habits to unlearn. And it takes time, and it takes a lot of gentleness and grace to unlearn all of that and to relearn how to live in this world that's not the Alice in Wonderland world.
So give me some examples of some of those types of things that, and they might be things we've talked about already, but what are the specifics of the things that we're unlearning as we're navigating that?
So part of it is figuring out where your programming comes from. You know, either you came from a religious background that taught you that you should submit to an abusive man, or you came from a family of origin where abuse was just the way that life was and it was normal. So when you met this man who also was manipulative, it was just the air you breathed. So you thought it was normal. So whatever it is, you have prior programming that did help you get into this relationship. And then you have the programming from the relationship of you shouldn't take care of yourself, of you shouldn't have too much money, of you shouldn't be happy, you know, because when you're happy, he gets unhappy and the abuse gets worse. And even though you might logically understand that those things are no longer true, you still have this habit of responding to the world in that way.
Yeah.
And that habit is going to show up all over the place. When you're trying to get jobs, it's going to show up when you are cooking dinner for your kids. It's going to show up when you're trying to make friends. And so if you try to jump back into the world super fast, it's going to get really hard because you're going to butt up against all of those things and you're going to sabotage a lot. So learning what the patterns were that you grew up with, and learning how to rewrite them, like tapping, you know, which is what this podcast is, the tapping and the EFT. EMDR therapy is one that I know has been very successful for a lot of women, and an abuse recovery program. There are several. I have participated in one called Mending the Soul that was very helpful, that was geared specifically towards faith-based organizations. Those same organizations that I talked about, which, you know, I'll give you a list of those, and that support women through leaving, often offer support groups and continued education for that healing process, and getting a good therapist. Because we don't know when you've come through that process, you don't know when you're showing up in a triggered way. You don't know when you're showing up in that old way. You don't know when that's stopping you and making your life harder. So you need someone that isn't operating within that programming to gently help you understand that and learn new habits of working in the world.
And before we're done, we're going to spend some time talking about specifically each of these steps, how we integrate tapping into this. But I think what you said there is really important in recognizing the fact that just because a tool like tapping is something that I can use on my own doesn't mean it's always appropriate for me to be using the tool on my own. Like we're talking like capital T trauma here. Like this is really big deal, hard stuff that professionals who work in this arena spend years and years and years putting themselves in a position to be helpful and healthy in being able to help women navigate all of this, and recognizing the fact that it's not a failing to think that, well, I should just be able to tap on this on my own. This is something that tapping is an amazing tool for you to be using. And this is something that is big enough that we really need to be working with trained people to help us navigate all of this, because we're so close to an issue like this. It's hard for us to see around the corners and know what we're even missing.
Absolutely. And as an example, so you've learned what abuse is, you've learned some of the ways you got into it, and you learn about boundaries. That's something that is one of the first things we teach women, is how to have healthy boundaries around themselves, how to live in a world where you expect respect and where you know how much of yourself you're going to give to other people.
Yep.
Because they've been in a situation where they had no boundaries before. And there's probably a lot of anger and angst tied to that, which is understandable. They were treated horribly. When they start to apply boundaries, they will overcorrect. It always happens. They will behave in a way that might later on, when they look back, think, wow, that was a little harsh. But here's the thing. they need to be allowed to do that because this is a new skill that's coming from a place where they've been really wounded and hurt before. And if they try to do that on their own, then what'll happen is they'll overcorrect. They'll respond in a way that they later regret. They'll start to doubt themselves again. They'll blame themselves, say, I can't do this right. But if you have a skilled practitioner or therapist and they come and talk about what happened, then the therapist can say, yeah, that might have been an overcorrection, but at least we're laying boundaries. We can have grace with ourselves. How can we do this better in the future? You know, and so it's the difference between a mistake setting you back and making you quit in your recovery and being able to just learn from a mistake during your recovery.
So then in this process, kind of the last bit that you've labeled in our notes is this idea of rebuilding. So we've gotten out, we have started to deal with the trauma itself, we're getting some healing. So what is different between recovery and rebuild in your mind?
So in my mind, rebuild is this place where she has spent some time, a year to, 5, 6, their recovery time is as long as they need it to be. But they feel like they're in this place where their feet are underneath them. They're healed enough that they feel like they can go out in the world and put themselves in the world without it sucking them dry again. And they're ready to rebuild, and they're ready to maybe start making a change in the world or really start chasing dreams again, which they never thought they'd be able to do.
Right.
So it's this difference between, before, during recovery, maybe they got a little job so that it was something that was paying the bills, taking care of them and their family, but they could put a lot of time and focus on their healing. Now they're in a place where they're ready to go out and pursue a dream or take a risk or help healing other people, and it's not just about their own recovery. And this is another place where those issues that came into their relationship with the abuser and then were magnified during that relationship with the abuser are going to come back. Because these are spirals. There's the idea that your issues spiral and you just continue as you grow to meet different levels of them as you grow. So here we're going to meet different levels. And the problem this time is they've spent all this time healing. And so they think I'm doing great. And you go out in the world and you take a risk, and all of a sudden that old trigger shows back up. And it's this moment of, I thought this was gone. But during your recovery, you were in a safe space, relatively. And so you were able to heal in a safe space. Now you're taking risks. So all of those fears of you can't trust yourself, the process of what do I really care about and who am I? If you make a mistake, the world is going to burn and crash. If you do this wrong, that's the end of it and you're back under a bridge with your kids. All of those old untruths that you learned come back because you're taking risks and you're building and it matters again.
So this framework, I think, is super, super useful. So let's walk back through these four areas again, and let's talk about just ways tapping can be applied. Again, making sure that we're getting appropriate help and supervision and support as we're doing this. But the issues that we're going to be tapping with and the things that we're going to be approaching. So start back at the beginning. In the midst of the relationship, what are going to be the primary issues or the things that can be useful that we can tap on right away?
So in the midst of it, the things that would be useful would be tapping during moments of high anxiety, just the general way that tapping can help bring down your emotions and your charge. Tapping, I think, could be useful. I would actually, if you know someone in the situation, some surrogate tapping, because part of what happens is the fear and the emotional charge. They call it, the fog of abuse. And it's just this heavy, dark fog that gets around your mind when you've been under crazy making and gaslighting and those other tactics that make it hard to think straight, which makes it hard for you to make the decisions you need to make to get to safety. And so tapping around that fog for a woman who, it's going to be hard for anyone in an abusive relationship to do any amount of tapping for themselves while they're in the toxic situation. If they were going to do any, I would say having it be with someone that understands and is skilled, and have it be on the things that would stop her from leaving. Tapping on being able to build up a little bit of the cash cushion. So when you leave, you have rent for several months. Tapping on the fear of what's going to happen to me when I leave. What's he going to do? Just tapping on being able to take the scary steps, I think would probably be best.
Great. So then the next step, as they are getting out and going through all of that, what are going to be the primary issues, the fears, the things that are the front of their mind and the front of their experience that become really good tappable issues?
So this is what I call the triage period of tapping. She is now in a place where she is having to go through the court system and having to go through the divorce process, and she's having to take care of herself. She's having to create boundaries so that he won't be able to control her even after the divorce is over. She's having to create boundaries that will protect her children and provide for her. And that is not something you can do when you're still in this mindset of, I can't, I'm afraid, I don't deserve. And so tapping on really specific ideas like, if I go in the courtroom and give my testimony, I'm going to be seen as hysterical and resentful. I am allowed to tell my story because it's my story and it happened and it's true. So that's a really good thing to tap on. And so really this is a triage moment where you're going to look at the major important things that she needs to be getting support, child support laid out, that she needs to be getting to a safe home, that she needs to be getting rules put in place that protect her from stalking, from being able to be controlled. When I was getting my divorce, my attorney sat me down and said, if I could wave a magic wand and this was done, what is the one thing you would want to have be true? And I said, I don't want to be able to be controlled. And so he laid out an agreement that made it so that, because when you have little bits of opening that are open to interpretation, open to, that bit of cooperation, that can be controlled. That's that inch that you can start giving away until you've given your freedom away. And I said, because I will give that inch because that's who I am. And I haven't learned how to not do that yet. I need to have it so that if I need to take those inches back, I can, and I can do it legally and safely. And so he wrote me a decree that did that. And so I was fortunate to have an attorney who understood those things. And I was fortunate to be talking to tapping practitioners who helped me be able to say stuff like that. So right then it's the triage tapping. What are the specific things she needs for her safety and well-being right now? And what's stopping her from getting them? Let's tap on those ideas.
So then in that third stage, the recovery stage, I'm guessing this is where we're, going to be getting into the meat of the history and the choices that we made in the past that were good, that were bad, that we're questioning, the stories that we have been given along the way and that sort of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And this is where she wants to be working with a practitioner and maybe also a therapist.
Right.
Because this is where the triggers happen. And this is where you're getting into really scary stuff, and you need to know someone that understands the techniques to make it so she can look at and heal those things without having to re-experience them and be re-traumatized. And she needs to be in a place of safety. So yes, this is the meat of going in and working through all of those old patterns.
And so then I'm guessing in that fourth part, when we're rebuilding, a lot of the tapping is going to be around what is allowed in our sense of worthiness and what we're worthy of having in our life, what success looks like, what happiness looks like, what safety looks like, what my family looks like, what my next relationship might look like.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is, and again, so it's a little bit similar to that initial leaving process in that it's a little bit more goal driven. It's not the triage like that first one was, but so during that triage process, it's what is our immediate goal? How can we tap to make that possible? During the recovery, it's okay, let's just heal. Let's just work. Let's find the things that need to be worked on and heal those as we go. And then in the third, it's again a bit more goal. Like I want to, for me, grow this business. I want to get a job that I feel good about. I want to start this nonprofit. These are the things that are coming up as I do that. lack of worthiness, not understanding who I am and what I'm capable of. But there are things that are going to come up because you try to do something and we're stopped by these old patterns in a lot of ways. So yeah, it's a little bit more of the goal-driven tapping.
Well, Melissa, thank you very much for your time. It's such a thoughtful, useful conversation, especially as we find ourselves more and more people being allowed to have these conversations. And so having this resource, I think, is going to serve a lot of people.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
It's hard to say after such a serious conversation that was a great conversation. I think it's important to recognize it was a really, really useful conversation. I learned a lot in the process. If you would like to check out that list of resources that we talked about at the beginning of the show, tappingqandapodcast.com, click on the link for episode 371. If you're listening to this in the website, we've included all of those resources above the player. And below the player, you can find Melissa's contact information and resources. Like I said, this is something that she's doing more and more of, is helping women who are in this circumstance. You can reach out to her if you'd like to find another perspective and some help. If you know someone in your life who could use this episode, please be our ambassador, pass it along. Maybe you want to pass this along in a way that is discreet because of the nature of the type of information that is in here. But it's really important that when we have people in our life who are in a circumstance that is dangerous, that is unhealthy, that is harmful to them, that they know that they have advocates, that they have people who love them, that they have people who are walking with them. And simply extending something like this might be the door that opens, that gives you the opportunity to have a longer conversation with them to help them find their way to the support and resources they need. If you are in this circumstance, do not try and do this alone. Melissa talked about multiple times in the conversation how valuable it is to be working with and walking with the right people so that you're making good decisions for the short term and the long term and doing it in a way that you can ensure your safety. Because some people who are doing this are in a circumstance where your physical safety is something that is really, really in jeopardy. So making sure that you are reaching out to train competent professionals. And again, we have all those resources. Most of them are free for you to be able to reach out to and get some support and some help so that you are not alone as you're struggling your way through this. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you have a recommendation for a future show, please let me know. I can always be reached, Gene, Gene, at tappingqanda.com, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye. The Tapping Q&A podcast is copyright Gene Montrestelli, Tapping Q&A 2016. All views expressed by guests are those of the guests and not necessarily of Gene Montrestelli or Tapping Q&A.